He didn't carry a flag. No medals, no fanfare. Just an old coat and a pair of shoes worn thin by time. But that morning at Arlington, something unusual happened. He walked alone, past rows of white headstones, in silence. No one called his name. No one saluted. A groundskeeper whispered to a visitor, "He comes every year, same day, never says a word." Then, from the quiet crowd, one young man stepped out, then another, and another, until 21 young men in civilian clothes followed behind him, one by one. No one told them to. No one had to. As they walked behind the old man, a single question echoed. Who is he? Thomas Granger was never one for medals. If you passed him on the street, you'd probably think he was just another quiet old man, the kind who always wears the same coat no matter the season and walks with a slow, measured pace, like he's listening for something beneath his own footsteps. He's in his 80s now. Hard of hearing, poor vision in one eye, and a slight tremble in his right hand from years of cold weather damage. But despite all that, every July 14th, without fail, Thomas Granger arrives at Arlington National Cemetery. Same time, same path, same silence. He walks as if the earth itself recognizes him, as if each gravestone he passes slightly bows in respect. Years ago, decades now, Thomas was a staff sergeant in what was once known among certain circles as Ghost Platoon, a unit so secretive that even most of the Pentagon never saw their deployment orders. Formed in the final years of the Vietnam War but operating across multiple theaters, Ghost Platoon specialized in last resort missions, the kind governments only admit existed 50 years later, if ever. They were sent in when all other options failed, and one day they never came back, or so everyone thought. A classified operation went sideways. Ambush, miscommunication, and a betrayal no one saw coming. 22 soldiers entered a jungle valley. Only one walked out, Thomas Granger. But when he returned, there were no welcome banners, no journalists, just a debriefing behind a locked door, followed by a quiet file stamped "failed sealed." The mission was deemed a national embarrassment. To acknowledge the dead would be to admit to the mission, so they didn't. They erased Ghost Platoon from the record. The bodies were never recovered. The names never etched into any wall. Thomas was told plainly, "You didn't see anything, and you weren't there." Many would have screamed, demanded truth, sued, written books, gone to the press. But Thomas didn't. He chose silence, not because he was afraid, but because shouting wouldn't bring his men back, and because deep down, he felt he hadn't earned the right to speak when 21 others hadn't come home at all. So he disappeared into quiet civilian life. No family, no fame. He took a job as a night security guard at a small high school just outside D.C. The kids never knew his name. The teachers barely noticed him. But every night, as the halls fell silent, he would walk them, not to check for intruders, but to remember the rhythm of patrol, to stay sharp, to stay present, to not forget. July 14th wasn't just a date. It was the day Ghost Platoon vanished, the day he buried 21 brothers in his memory, because the government refused to give them graves. Every year since, he walks the same path in Arlington, as if the headstones that do exist can hear his steps and carry them to the souls who never got one. Each step is heavy, not because of age, but because each one symbolizes a life. The fifth step is for Corporal Mendez, who always whistled before a firefight. The 12th is for Private Lang, who wanted to be a preacher. The 17th, that one slows him down. It was his best friend. He doesn't carry flowers. He doesn't salute. He doesn't weep, because grief is not a performance. It is presence. And Thomas Granger is present, fully, painfully, unshakably. People see him walk and wonder, is he someone important? A retired general? A chaplain? No. He's just the one who survived, the one who walks because no one else can. And for years, no one noticed him, until the day a young cadet watched long enough to ask the right question. But that's a story for later. For now, Thomas remains a shadow in daylight, a man who steps lightly, but whose memory walks beside him in combat boots. He never spoke of Ghost Platoon, but in Arlington, with each silent step, he makes sure they are never forgotten. Because some battles don't end with peace treaties. They end in the hearts of the men who came home alone. And for Thomas Granger, the war never really ended. It started 5 years ago with a glance, a brief moment that most people would have overlooked. Cadet Jacob Ellison, then a second-year student at the nearby Virginia Military Institute, was visiting Arlington with his class on a field assignment. They were instructed to observe traditions, memorial formations, and how the living remember the fallen. Most cadets stood near the tomb of the unknown soldier, absorbing the ceremony. But Jacob's attention was elsewhere. He noticed an old man walking alone, away from the crowd, following a precise path among the headstones. Slow, steady, silent. There was nothing flashy about him. No uniform, no salutes, no flowers. Just a worn coat and a look in his eyes that froze Jacob in place. Other people passed him like he wasn't there. But Jacob saw something different, something deliberate. The way the man walked, not casually, but with a rhythm, a purpose. He counted, one step, then another. After the seventh, the old man paused, briefly, then resumed walking. At the 12th, he touched a headstone, not reading it, just resting his fingers on the top like greeting an old friend. Jacob leaned to one of his classmates and asked, "Who is that man?" No one knew, and that made Jacob obsessed. That evening, Jacob couldn't stop thinking about the man. He returned to Arlington the next day on his own, hoping to catch a glimpse of him again, but the man was gone. Jacob wasn't the kind to let a question go unanswered, so he requested access to past public camera feeds at Arlington through an ROTC liaison for training purposes. Surprisingly, permission was granted for non-sensitive footage. Jacob fast-forwarded through July 14th for several years. There he was, the same man, same path, same coat, same day, every year. It was more than a habit. It was a ritual. Jacob studied his movements frame by frame, each pause, each turn. Then he noticed something chilling. Every year, the man took exactly 21 steps, and each step matched a particular row or section of headstones. It wasn't random. It was a pattern, a code, almost like a memorial formation in motion. Jacob mapped the trajectory and matched it against old layout files of the cemetery. Then came the breakthrough. Digging deeper through his school's restricted archive access, often meant for historical research, Jacob stumbled upon a buried reference to a declassified operation. It was listed vaguely under the name Operation Seraph, Platoon G31. But in a forgotten footnote, scanned from a faded field log, there was a single phrase: Ghost Platoon presumed KIA. Recovery not possible. Names withheld by directive. Goosebumps. Jacob printed the log, took it to a retired instructor at VMI who had served in the late Cold War era. The man read it, squinted at the faded type, then whispered, "You found a ghost." With help from the instructor, Jacob pieced together a partial roster of Ghost Platoon. Only 21 names. None of them buried, none of them honored, no medals. No acknowledgments, no flags folded and presented to grieving mothers, and only one person unlisted. A man referred to simply as Sergeant TG, last seen exiting Site Alpha, Thomas Granger. Jacob returned to the cemetery on his own, this time bringing with him a copy of the 21 names. He stood in silence, tracing the exact route Thomas walked. And he felt it. Every step wasn't just part of a ritual. It was a roll call, a funeral march walked every year, alone, by the only man left to remember them. He didn't just walk, he carried them. Each step was a name. Each pause was a memory. Each year was a promise. You're not forgotten. Jacob stood still for nearly an hour. Then he made a decision. Jacob returned to VMI with a mission of his own. He handpicked 20 of his fellow cadets, not for their rank or GPA, but for their character. The ones who understood silence, who knew what it meant to listen to history with more than ears. He didn't give them an order. He didn't ask for anything flashy. He simply gathered them and said, "There's a man who walks every July 14th. He walks 21 steps. He walks for men who never got to." They didn't need more explanation. That summer, the 21 young men, all in plain clothes, arrived quietly at Arlington. They didn't speak. They didn't even gather together. They each stood behind a tree or beside a row, waiting, until Thomas Granger appeared. Right on time, right on path. He didn't notice them at first, but when he took his seventh step, Jacob took his first, then another, and another, until 21 young men fell in step behind him, not as an audience, but as a formation, as a tribute. No one told them to, no one had to. That year marked the first time Thomas Granger wasn't alone. He didn't speak. He didn't ask why. He simply stopped after his final step, turned slightly and nodded once, a slow, solemn gesture of acknowledgement and acceptance. From that day forward, every year on July 14th, they return. New cadets, new faces, but always 21. Some come back year after year. Some bring their fathers. One year, a retired general walked with them, but only 3 steps, and then stood back in salute. And still, Thomas never said a word. But from that first day Jacob joined him, his burden became shared. The names were no longer carried by one man, but by a living chain of memory. And in the silence of that walk, a forgotten platoon was remembered, not by ceremony, but by step, by presence, by witness. It began like every year. Step 1. The sound of Thomas Granger's shoes pressing into the grass seemed to echo far louder than it should have, not because the cemetery was loud, but because the silence knew what was coming. The young men behind him followed, 21 in all, but they kept distance. They didn't know where he was going, only that he had to go, and they had to follow. Thomas's body moved slowly, but his memory moved fast. Each step forward pulled him further back in time. Step 1. Mendez. He sees Corporal Mendez again. Dark hair, always messy, played harmonica at night. On that mission, Mendez spotted a cluster of children hiding in a bamboo thicket, frightened and half-starved. He broke protocol and crossed the perimeter, told the others to cover him. That's when the mine went off. Thomas sees it as clearly now as he did then. The shockwave, the silence after, and the shoes, small shoes, tossed in the air. Mendez never got to scream. Step 2. Lang Private Lang, the preacher's son from Tennessee. He used to quote scripture before every drop, though no one ever asked him to. In that valley during the ambush, Lang was the first to take position behind a downed tree and return fire. He didn't even flinch. Shot after shot until a sniper caught him between helmet and collar. "I'm not afraid to die," he once told Thomas. "I'm afraid of dying forgotten." He wasn't. Not today. Step 3. Ruiz Specialist Ruiz. The radio operator with a temper, but a heart like gold. When the comms went dead, he climbed the ridge alone to boost the signal manually. They warned him. He just smiled and said, "They can't hit what they can't catch." He never made it back down. Step 4. Boone Sergeant Boone, the unit medic. A big man, quiet voice. He kept giving his own water to wounded villagers they passed. In the ambush, Boone crawled through machine gun fire to reach a wounded scout. He didn't make it 2 feet before his back was torn open. Thomas remembered holding his hand until it went cold. Step 5. Yoon Private First Class. Yoon, Korean-American, barely 19. Always carried 2 things in his pack, his mother's photo and a jar of strawberry jam. On the last night before insertion, he said, "If I don't make it back, bury the jar with me." They couldn't even recover his body. Thomas whispers aloud, almost too soft to hear, "Sorry, Yoon, still got your jam." The first tear falls, not from Thomas, but from the second cadet in line behind him. Step 6. Donovan Lieutenant Donovan, the commanding officer. He was the kind of leader that walked in back, so everyone else felt safe in front. During the withdrawal, when everything went to hell, Donovan refused to leave until every last man moved. He stayed behind to cover the retreat. His last radio transmission was clipped, but Thomas never forgot it. "Tell my daughter, tell her the stars were worth it." Step 7. Tran Corporal Tran, Vietnamese-American, translator, and sniper. He moved through the jungle like he belonged to it. When they got flanked, Tran silently eliminated 4 enemy scouts before being spotted. They found him, still gripping his rifle, 3 empty casings in his lap, and 1 round unused. He saved it for himself. Step 8. Weller Private Weller. He was supposed to be in college. He forged his father's signature to enlist. He died dragging another soldier to safety, despite being hit twice himself. Thomas remembers yelling at him to stop. He didn't listen then. He wouldn't have listened now. Step 9. Elmore Sergeant Elmore. Tall, stoic, always wrote letters he never mailed. He walked point that day, first one in, last one to react. Thomas still hears the click of the tripwire, still sees the shrapnel like frozen birds mid-flight. Step 10. Delaney. This is the step where Thomas slows down. Private Delaney was his best friend. They enlisted together, drank together, dreamed of opening a mechanic shop after discharge. When Delaney was shot through the chest, Thomas tried to carry him. "Leave me," Delaney whispered. "You're the one with the memory. Take it with you." Thomas took it. At this point, the air shifts. The young men walking behind Thomas feel it. No words are spoken, but a few blink hard, staring into nothing. They don't know these names, but they know this weight. Step 11. Carter, the demolitions expert, blew the bridge after the last man crossed, stayed on the other side, smiled when it detonated. Step 12. Fields machine gunner. Out of ammo, he still held the line with an empty barrel until the rest could run. When they turned back, his body was draped over his weapon. Step 13. Stone. Youngest in the unit. 18. Got in by lying, shot while protecting a medic. Step 14. Nakamura. The quiet one. Nobody knew he wrote poetry until his notebook was found. Step 15. Torres died on his birthday, carried pictures of his 2 sons. One was named Freedom, the other Honor. Step 16. O'Reilly told jokes before every mission, didn't joke that day. Step 17. Bishop Chaplin's assistant. Held a man's hand while he died, even as rounds flew past him. Step 18. Morrow volunteered to carry supplies. Was never supposed to be in combat, but he stayed when others fell. Step 19. Vasquez took the sniper round meant for Thomas. He didn't even see it coming. Thomas did. Step 20. Sloan set the final flare. Signaled the last evac bird. Thomas turned to see him waving, then gunfire, then silence. Step 21. The last step. Thomas stops. He breathes out. The silence wraps around him like a shroud. Behind him, 21 young men stand still. They don't move. They don't speak. They don't need to. Thomas bends down, touches the grass. His hand trembles. Not from age, but from memory. Step 22. Himself one final step. Forward. This one isn't for them. This one is for himself. The survivor. The carrier of names. The one who remembers. He walks that step alone, because that's the cost of being the last to leave. And behind him, 21 shadows follow, bearing witness. For the first time in decades, he is not alone. But the silence remains sacred. Step 21 was done. Thomas Granger stopped. Not out of fatigue. His legs had walked harder roads. Not out of confusion. He had known this path for decades. But because this was where the journey always ended, in front of him stood a plain white headstone. No name, no inscription, no dates, just the grave number. No one visited it. No flags, no flowers. But to Thomas, it was everything. He stood there a moment longer than usual. Then slowly, he lowered himself to one knee. With care, not dramatics, he reached into the inside pocket of his coat. His fingers trembled slightly, but not from age, from memory. He pulled out something carefully folded, wrapped in a faded handkerchief. A map, yellowed at the edges, creased from being opened and closed for too many years. The ink had faded, but not entirely. Some lines still burned with red. Some names still marked in pencil. Boone, Ruiz, Donovan, and at the top corner, Ghost 22, OP, Seraph. There was even a stain in the bottom left corner. Coffee, maybe, or blood. Thomas didn't remember anymore. He unfolded it on the gravestone, placed a stone on one corner to hold it against the wind. Then he stood. He didn't speak, didn't weep, didn't look for acknowledgement. This was never for the living. A few yards away, a senior officer was walking the grounds. Brigadier General Matthew Claymore, retired but still respected, had come for a quiet visit. He wasn't looking for drama, just a few minutes to pay his respects. He almost walked past Thomas. Almost. But then he saw the map. From that distance, something about it struck him. The markings, the faded ink, the formation codes that hadn't been used in over 4 decades. He blinked, took a step closer, and when he saw it fully, his expression changed. Not to shock, not confusion, but recognition. He didn't say a word. He simply removed his cap and stood there, motionless. Because he knew what that map was. It was the only known operational map of Ghost Platoon. One never recorded, one never submitted, one never supposed to exist. And here it was, not in a museum, not under glass, but placed gently on the tombstone of a man with no name. Claymore realized that gravestone wasn't empty. It was the final resting place of every man Thomas Granger couldn't bury. A symbol, a placeholder, a sacred space for those denied a grave. Claymore took a breath, as if preparing to salute, but he stopped himself. This wasn't his moment. Thomas turned, not hurriedly, not dramatically, just as he always had, quietly, deliberately. He didn't look back at the map. He didn't wait for validation. The memory had been placed. That was all that mattered. As he walked away, his shoes brushed gently against the path. Behind him, the cadets, the 21 young men, watched in absolute stillness. Jacob Ellison, the cadet who started it all, stepped forward. He didn't speak, didn't move quickly. He simply stood at attention. And then he saluted, crisp, clean, silent. A second cadet followed suit, then a third, then a fourth, until, in perfect unison, all 21 stood in formation, backs straight, chins high, eyes forward. They weren't saluting for Thomas. They were saluting for the map, for the names, for the silence, for the men who never got one. Thomas didn't stop walking. He didn't turn to see the 21 salutes behind him. He didn't need to, because some messages are louder when unspoken, some honors are greater when unseen, and some heroes don't need to face the crowd to know they've been heard. The wind picked up slightly. The map fluttered, but the stone held it in place. Claymore stepped forward slowly. He bent down, examined the document again. And then he did something no one expected. He folded the map exactly as it had been, tucked it into his jacket and whispered, "We'll make it right." Then he looked to the 21 cadets, still standing, still saluting. And for the first time in years, he saluted back. Not as a general, but as a man who finally saw what the country had missed. Thomas Granger kept walking, not for applause, not for medals, but because he knew silence could speak louder than parades. And that day, without a single word exchanged, the world finally answered back. The sun had shifted now. What was once soft morning gold had deepened into a warm afternoon hue, casting long shadows through the quiet rows of white. From a high, drifting aerial shot, Thomas Granger could be seen walking alone, growing smaller and smaller as he moved down the path. Then, just before he disappeared from view, the trees claimed him. No music, just the soft rustle of wind through the leaves, like whispered names being spoken in languages only memory understands. Back near the headstone, the once unnamed grave, something stirred in the breeze. A small folded piece of paper, placed under the rock beside the map earlier, had come loose. It fluttered, then flipped over once, twice, landing face up. The camera slowly zoomed in, a handwritten note, in faint ink and shaky script, but still legible. "It's not that I live to tell the story, it's that they still live, inside me." There was no signature, but no one questioned who wrote it. The next morning, the cemetery was quiet again, as always. Dew clung to the grass. A new day had begun. But something had changed. As the morning sun rose over the eastern tree line, its rays hit the gravestone where Thomas had stopped the day before. It was no longer blank. In place of the number code and unmarked white surface, a new inscription had been added overnight, Ghost Platoon Memorial, in honor of the 21 men who vanished into history. known only to the one who walked so they would not be forgotten. No speeches, no press, no ceremony, just recognition. The groundskeeper found it first. He paused, removed his hat, and whispered a soft, "About time." Later that day, visitors noticed it, then tourists, then cadets from VMI who quietly lined up in formation, placed small stones at the base, and stood in respectful silence. By noon, there were 21 stones, each carried by a different hand, each placed with reverence. The screen slowly fades to black. No music swells. No narration interrupts. Just one sentence, centered on the screen, in stark white lettering. How many of us are still living because someone else chose to sacrifice in silence? A few moments of black, then nothing. Just the echo of footsteps in memory. This ending invites the viewer not only to remember, but to reconsider. To think not about the man who walked, but about the many who couldn't. To realize that some lives are carried quietly, not in books or parades, but in the quiet commitment of one person who refuses to forget. Because in the end, Thomas Granger wasn't just walking for Ghost Platoon, he was walking for all of us. As Thomas Granger faded into the trees and the map returned to silence, we're left with more than just a story. We're left with a question. How many of us today are walking because someone else chose to stand still? How many freedoms, comforts, and ordinary days have been purchased by sacrifices we'll never see and names we'll never know? Thomas didn't ask for attention. He didn't hold a flag or demand recognition. But through each of his silent steps, he carried a platoon that history tried to forget. And in doing so, he taught us something powerful. In a world that often values noise over meaning and fame over substance, he showed us the strength of quiet duty. He reminded us that true honor isn't always found in medals, but in memory. That even the most ordinary-looking person may carry the weight of extraordinary service. Today, perhaps more than ever, we need to walk like Thomas, not necessarily in boots or through cemeteries, but through our daily lives, carrying respect, compassion, and gratitude with every step. Maybe it means calling a veteran in your life. Maybe it means listening more, speaking less, or maybe it just means not forgetting. Have you ever met someone like Thomas Granger? Do you have a family member whose story still hasn't been told? Or do you believe some heroes should remain anonymous, remembered not by the world, but by the few who truly knew them? Leave a comment below. Let's remember together. Thank you so much for staying with us through this story. If it moved you, if it reminded you of someone or helped you reflect, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. We share stories like this not to glorify the past, but to honor the present and to remind each other what quiet courage really looks like. Because the world needs more reminders and more walkers like Thomas. We'll see you in the next story. Until then, walk gently and remember boldly.